Recording. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the National Center Multidisciplinary Teams Training and Technical Assistance Center. We have Engage and Maintain Law Enforcement as our webinar today, and I imagine we'll have a few other people joining us. I just wanted to let you know that we are funded by the Office of Victims of Crime, and that we have the opinions, findings, and conclusions are Jordan's and the National Center's, and not part of the Department of Justice. But moving forward, if anybody has any troubles with any of the technical assistance, I'm subbing in for the folks from InCall to be the housekeeper today. So please let me know. My email is lfur@lifespan.roch, as in Rochester, .org. So you can send me a message if you've got any questions. Otherwise, make sure that your photo and name are correct as you're moving forward. And again, as we keep going, if you don't mind to add in to the chat where you're from, just so we can make sure that all the folks that are here are in the right spot, and that we can give credit to the community that you're from. As we're moving forward, if you don't mind adding the state, because we're not all familiar with some of the cities and counties that where you're in, but that would be super. So your name, your agency, and the locality and the state, that would be super. So today we've got Captain Jordan Satinsky. Sorry, Jordan, sorry about that. That's okay. He's a new captain, and we're thrilled to have him. He's on our advisory board for this program, and from Montgomery County, Maryland, that just down the street from me in Richmond, Virginia, and has been at this work for quite some time. For some of you that were in DC or were able to watch online, Jordan was able to be one of the presenters on that and stopped by and spoke to us before he headed out. But I will turn it over to Jordan, and thank you again, sir, for all of your work and for being available to us here.
Hey, thank you for having me, everybody. Lisa, thank you very much for that introduction. Again, my name's Jordan Satinsky. I'm a captain with Montgomery County Police Department in Maryland. I have had the honor to work in this world as far as elder and vulnerable adult abuse for about 11 plus years now. My background outside of playing around as the captain of our community engagement division has been in mostly violent crimes. For 15 years, I did child abuse, child sex assault, homicide, adult sex crimes, and as well as elder abuse and elder abuse homicides. When I became a sergeant, I took over a unit that had domestic violence and elder vulnerable adult abuse, and was able to work with our Health and Human Services Division. I'm sorry, I got that stuck. To develop a new program where we basically mimicked the Child Protective Services / police department model of investigations. And from there, we built a whole new program, engaged our state's attorney's office, victim advocates, public-private partners, and we increased our investigations and outcomes well over 100%. We went from doing about 12 of these types of cases a year to, on average, we do about 150, and we have about a 70% prosecution rate of those. A lot of the times when we don't have one of those, it's because, unfortunately, our victim has expired and the medical examiner can't show that there was a criminal intent, or the victim in themselves does not want to move forward. And we try not to re-victimize our victims, and we give them as much power as they can by letting them make those decisions. So over the last few years, I've had the honor to present at NAFSA a few times and a few other places about the intersection of law enforcement and APS, because something I didn't realize was how little we all knew about each other. There has been, even when I first started in this line of work, I didn't understand what a social worker did. And I'll tell you, social workers had a very different view of what we did. But we all ended up having the same common goal. And once we all got together in the same room and started talking, and we realized what I called A, somebody else called B, or vice versa, the world started changing. We started training together. There were some social activities, which I will tell you, those help a great deal. And they really brought the group together. Because of those efforts to date, and remember, this group kind of reformatted and started with our adult protective services about 11 years ago. We went from 3 investigators and 6 APS agents to 21 APS agents and 11 investigators. So that's how big the unit has gotten just based on what we've done. And I haven't been there in a few years, and the processes that we put in place are still in place and running. And they've built upon things that they've learned, which I think is fantastic. So today, one of the things we're going to talk about is that E-MDT. And I understand that a lot of you have E-MDT, some of you may not. Some of you may be trying to start it and are running into roadblocks, engaging folks in costume like myself. And a lot of the times, those issues come in, again, because of a misunderstanding. I don't think you're on this call because you don't understand the value of having the cop there. I think it's how do you get them to come and stay? That's really the bigger issue. I see Maureen shaking her head. Yeah, that's it. And that's hard because police are we're trained from when we're young cops that we are to look for, go in, solve a problem as quickly as possible, go on to the next thing. It's not until you become an investigator where you're taught the marathon side of it, but still your focus is to get the bad guy. It's not to interact with the victim, right? Or as little as possible. That's what we have victim advocates for. And it's not to conduct multi-agency investigations because sometimes that takes away from what our primary goal is, because many cops feel they can't share information amongst organizations or have a distrust of organizations because they don't understand them. And all that comes down to, again, is what I said earlier, is an understanding. And everyone's leaving their egos at the door. And that goes, I'm going to say this in this form, that goes for not only my cops, but also the APS workers that I've worked with. Because a lot of them have said the same thing. They have just as big as egos as cops do in a lot of ways. I see Krista's doing the same thing I was doing a few years ago, just smiling, going, yep, that's it. So I'm going to discuss kind of the pitfalls and things that Mario Wazusin, who is my partner in crime in this adventure, he and I kind of went through when we first built this, to where we found footing, to how we kept it sustainable. And I think that's keeping it sustainable is the hard part. And I advocate for that because there are many people who helped start that unit who aren't there anymore. They've either retired, they've gone on to different things like myself. But the people that went in, because we had MOUs and we had standard operating procedures and we had understanding, and the big word that not a lot of cops understand or know, all of the social workers here do, empathy. Combining all those things really did change how this went forward. And I'm going to be honest, some of this is a sales pitch, because some of this is going to be, you have to convince the people who sit in positions like myself that there's a return on investment. And the return on investment for police is community engagement in this current format and arrest. That's what they want to see. They want to know how, because police use arrest to show how well they're doing. I don't care what any victims group or any group says out there. The first question anybody ever asks, how did you close that case? If you don't hear arrest, people are like, oh. When you get into the next part, the victim didn't want us to go forward because of X, and it's their case, not mine. It changes the dynamic. But the first question is always arrest. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk a little bit about maintaining that long-term relationship. It's going to be work. It's much like a marriage in a lot of ways. It really is. And I'll tell you, there are going to be some good cops, just like there are good social workers, and there are going to be some bad ones, and just like the social workers. And it takes a little while to mesh the personalities. But the nice thing was it didn't take long, because with the exception of, and I'll be honest, 2 of my police officers that worked in the original group and 1 of the APS workers in Mario's group, everybody else was still there for about 8 years, because they realized not only the value of it, but learned from it and learned how to interact. And we'll also touch on cross-reporting, because I know that's also a huge deal. Cops hate sharing information because they feel it's going to cause all sorts of issues with their case. Look, they always forget we got to provide discovery anyway if we go to court, so it all goes out the window anyway. I'm not a huge fan of keeping everything cloak and dagger quiet, but there are some limitations. And this also goes on the other side as far as APS and what they're able to share with us. Not what they're willing, but what they're able. Many of your states may have different rules as to how you can interact with law enforcement when it comes to these investigations. For child investigations, it's very easy. Almost every state in the union has a law that allows police and or CPF to work together for the betterment of the child for all sorts of things, and we can cross-report, share information, all of that. Well, as soon as you hit 18, all that goes out the window. And now we have to fight between each other to try to figure out how to share. In our Maryland Code of Regulations, we actually found a little line that somebody added to something that said, if police have a criminal investigation for an elder or vulnerable adult, they can cross-report and share with Health and Human Services. No one knew about it. We found it, went, ooh, hold on to that one. And we ran with it. And that's what we showed to everybody. We put it everywhere.
This
So-
is a meeting that I invited a bunch of people to that I shouldn't have.
What did you do that for?
Carol, can you mute? Thank you. Okay, so yeah, there'll be a lot of cross reporting for that, situations for that as well. So far, everybody okay? All right. And please feel free, if you have questions, I'm sorry I didn't reference this, please put them in the chat. Lisa's agreed to go ahead and answer them. And Lisa, if you see anything that you're not sure about, please just say something. I'm not against going off script and chatting. That's totally fine. And I know it's not easy sometimes to do the Zoom thing and get into a discussion, but yeah, I'm happy to do it. So traditionally, when we ran these cases, we ran them in law enforcement did their thing, APS did their thing, and we ended up talking to the victim multiple times. And sometimes we crossed paths with each other, but it usually was court. Or it was when one of my folks showed up with a subpoena to say, hey, what do you have about this, about person X or Y? And there would be a long time before we got anything. In order to satisfy our mandates and our timelines, we would go as quickly as we could with a mind for detail as best we could and try to engage APS, but would routinely be pushed aside because APS didn't understand our role and they thought they couldn't work with us. A lot of times, law enforcement supervisors look at these cases like law enforcement supervisors looked at domestic violence in the 80s. It's a family problem. They're not solvable. What am I getting involved for? I got murders, I got carjackings, I got other things. Once we started going into these and realizing how many there were of these types of cases, it changed the arc. And I will tell you, after working all different types of crimes, when I got into elder abuse and saw how many reports came in just a week, I was astonished. Now, I understand about 80% of those were financial, and I know nothing about those. I'm not going to sit here and try to tout that. It's terrible. I get it. But the other 20% that were physical or sexual or both, I couldn't believe how many were coming in and where they were coming from. It was just at least 1 to 2 a week that we would get with, and we'd end up working with APS. So they're there. And once our leaders saw that, they started realizing how they could move forward and how this would actually be a good return on investment for our department and our community. And really, we don't have an understanding as police of the MDT outside of a sexual assault group, right? Like a SART, we understand. A child MDT, we understand. An elder abuse MDT, what the heck is that? Like to cops, that's just another meeting. They don't see it. And the ombudsman, that's a whole nother world I had to learn about, which if you have the opportunity, definitely engage your law enforcement partners about the value of the ombudsman. Because while I know they don't technically are not supposed to technically work with us on all the time unless the victim wants us to, they do have a great deal of knowledge that they imparted upon us to assist us in our investigations. Remember what I said about return on investment. That's where we are. That's what we need. The police need to see how this is going to positively impact them. They're not looking for 100%. They just need to be able to position their resources correctly and understand why. In the last 2 years, policing across the nation, we haven't garnered as much recruitment support as we used to have. So our numbers are dropping off tremendously. In my agency, I have 1,300 officers, a little bit more than that, and we're down almost 200 just in the last 2 years. So if I go to a police commander and say, hey, we're police chief, hey, I need 10 detectives to work these elder abuse things, they're going to say, why? I need to know why when I have all these other things happening out there. But once you show that, and you can identify it, because especially, I'm assuming everybody here at some point understands how cases come into their adult protective services divisions and how they're kind of triaged out, and whether it's a criminal, non-criminal, or if it's a physical, sexual, or a financial. Once we start seeing that and we're able to show that to our police commanders and how much there is there, it changes it. We can then say, hey, why don't we take the police, why don't we take APS, we put them together, house them together, and train them together. Because I will tell you, I learned more in my first year, even as a sergeant from APS, just trying to figure out different cases as far as how do I address this victim? How do I talk to this victim with dementia and all these injuries? How do I interact with the family? Because I don't know. My cases were always, well, he's dead. I just go talk to the family, go to the next thing. Now how do I get in there and be able to extrapolate information to further this case in a positive way for that victim? And I got that from my APS agents. Because our APS agents, we let them lead the victim member interviews, and we sat in the corner and watched. And we listened. And we feed them some questions here and there. But for the most part, they asked all the right questions. And then on the suspect side, when we found one, we flipped the roles and we'd have the APS agents feed us questions when it would help, whether it be for guardianship or the criminal matter, or maybe there was something we were asking that didn't make sense. But to them, we would be able to massage that question with the suspect to help both cases, because there's the criminal side, obviously, which we're both going to be part of as APS and the police. And there's the civil side where we've had to come in as police and testify to that as well, to matters in the civil, especially when it comes to guardianship of the person, not so much for us as property, but of person. So by training together and learning how to interact with one another and learning what the roles are and practicing it, it really changed a lot. And we found when we had our victim interviews, and I told my detectives, just sit second chair, which is what we call as the partner position, sit second chair and just watch Christina do the interview. Watch her talk to this 80-year-old woman about with the 4th degree decubitus ulcer and see what she does and just take notes. They learned so much. And when we flipped the roles, it was the same thing. And they both saw the positives of it. And then that feedback loop started where our investigators are coming to us and going to the bosses and say, hey, we're learning. We get this. It makes sense now. We can do this. We don't have to have separate silos. We can all work this together and have a positive outcome. The bosses saw that and said, okay, yeah, we can do this. And then we started bringing in more cases to the prosecutor, so much so that they had to create a whole new unit just to cover what we were bringing in because of these combined things. And we ended up putting APS, the police, and the prosecutors all in the same spot. We're all sharing walls so we can all talk to one another. Every day, APS sends out all of their cases that they got in the night before. The police department does the same thing on the other side, and the prosecutors, the prosecutors, police supervisors, and APS supervisors all get the same thing. It's like a triple check to make sure something didn't get missed. And there might be cases where, hey, it might not rise to the level of a police matter, but APS might say, hey, prior to us doing this relationship, we've been out to this house 85 times. Would you mind coming with us? Sure, we'll go. And from there, all of a sudden, we have an abuse case we know nothing about. Because most victims of these abuse cases, they don't call us, right? We get it from the mailman because unfortunately they've passed away already. Or we get it from a relative who's from out of state who can't get in touch. Or a neighbor who's concerned. That's normally where we end up getting these types of cases from. So by having that repeater, we can say, oh, let's go check them out. Let's go see what's going on. And then we can come in and help. We really do want to help. But law enforcement in and of itself, we're not taught this. I can tell you my police academy class 26 years ago, I think I got 12 minutes on elder abuse. And most of it was, it's really not your problem. So just to give you an idea, and that hasn't changed much. These things have to start from the top down. Okay, I got lucky where I had somebody who was of my same rank at APS, who we went and basically showed our bosses, our chiefs, the positives of doing this relationship. And our bosses, both separately in our county, which is a little over 1 million people just north of DC, said, yeah, we're good with this. We see where you're coming from. We understand. And then they said to the department, this is how you're going to do it. And that's it. Cops are rank and follow folks. We will follow orders. That's how we're set up. We're paramilitary. But if they don't get an order, they're not going to do it half the time unless you got the right person. So that's why you have to be able to really set up and have that information, have that evidence to show your health and human services folks and your police department partners, here are the benefits of this. Here's how it becomes a better thing. And if anyone needs examples of that, we'll be happy to share those. The hardest part about starting this whole thing is just reaching out, right? All of us have cell phones, emails, fax, some of us, you know, where it's easy to do that and go back and forth, even Zoom, right? My suggestion, none of this. Go to the person. Have that one-on-one conversation with someone of your same level, to have that introductory speech about what you want to do and how you want to affect it and how you want to bring them into the E-MDT to explain, hey, you can even say, and this is, I've done this as well. Hey, we want you to come to our E-MDT to sit down just to listen. We want you to see how many cases we have. We want to take you and maybe even take you out on a case with us to show you how we work it, because you may not see all the things that we're seeing. You might not see any of the things that we're seeing. You might not have ever done this before. And you just have to get the right person who's interested, right? And that's the tough part, is getting to that person. I got lucky, but here's the thing. Everybody has a boss. So if you don't get the right person, keep working your way up, because eventually you're going to get somebody like me who's going to go, why isn't anybody talking to that person? And that's how it will start. But you got to keep trying. There are some agencies that are very hesitant for change, and there'll be a lot of roadblocks that they're going to put up. And whether it's APS or police, that's just what's going to happen. It's important not to give up. And I will tell you, I was very much ready not to give up if Mario had basically said, go away, Jordan, the day that I met him. So I would have kept going. Does anyone have, and just by a raise of hands, does anyone have that right person they could reach out to in law enforcement? At least they believe they do. Yeah, okay. Go ahead, Lisa.
Well, I was just gonna say, throw it in the chat if you don't want to
Yeah,
figure out how to do that. Yes, no, maybe.
yep. Law enforcement managers, look, for the most part, I'm going to be very clear. And I have a very slim understanding of APS management, so you'll have to kind of go with me on this one. But if it's anything like a law enforcement management, we all got into this business to help people at the line level, and they do a terrible job about preparing us for supervision. Right. And I will tell you that even as a police executive now. As a police sergeant, I took a 2-week class on how to be a sergeant. That was it. And most of it was on liability and how not to get jammed up. We're not taught how to interact with other agencies. We're not taught how to do those things. Cops are like military, very line function. You sometimes have to come to them and show them that and show them how it's going to work. They'll follow you, but they just need that information. Law enforcement managers are the same thing. Bring them into that MDT. They'll sign your NDAs. They'll come in. They'll do their thing. Let them watch. These MDTs, if you're doing policy review, I wouldn't suggest bringing the cops in because they're not going to be interested. Like there are some E-MDTs that are solely policy at this level. They haven't gotten the case review. Get to the case review, something that's going to really get them on board to where they're saying, yeah, I want to be part of this. I want to have something going on here. I want to be part of this adventure. Let them talk. Ask them questions, engage them. Cops will talk. You just gotta, they're like my 14-year-old son. He's quiet until you unplug the cork and then you can't stop him. So just talk to them. Tabletop exercises were something we found to be incredible once we started these MDTs and really got people in, because we could throw out fake cases or cases we found online and basically build something out. And it was a no judgment zone. Jordan, how would you handle this? Mario, how would you handle this? And then we'd have the detectives, hey, critique us. What we do right? What we do wrong? Some of them were brutally honest, which was fine, but it was good to hear, right? And everyone had to go through it to learn each other's part and roles in the system. One of the other things we found out working together, none of us realized that APS workers, at least in our jurisdiction, go out alone quite a bit to these homes where victims, they might have dementia, they might have a caretaker that also has dementia or a caretaker that doesn't care for anybody with a government ID. And we ended up having one APS worker get knocked out cold while on a call that it was somewhat of an innocuous call, but she got knocked out cold. From that, we put together a safety training seminar at our police academy where we had APS workers come in with my police detectives, and we put one of my police detectives in the red man suit, which is like a karate punching suit. And we had one of our defensive tactics instructors teach APS agents how to get out. It wasn't how to engage people. It wasn't how to take them down. It was, how do you get out of a situation with the little knit hairs of the back of your neck stand up? There's no shame in it. Just run, right? But let's say you can't. How would you get out of that handhold? How would you get out of getting pushed down? What happens if you do get pushed down? Once we kind of showed them that over 4 hours, and then we put them into a practical where they had to do those things, it was amazing to watch. Actually, the guy in the red man suit, he was a former Marine whose knee still hurts him from one of the APS agents that swept his leg. But they appreciated that, and our investigators and even our officers appreciated how much risk they took, because our officers take it for granted. They have a badge and a gun and a vest. You guys walk in with a cell phone ID and some paper. That's it. So there was a much better understanding between how the two operate, and much more willing for people to operate. And as this information got out to our rank and file on the road, if an APS agent was out on something and needed help, patrol was much quicker to respond than they had in the past. They would get there, assist, and move on. Versus they were like, in the past, they would roll their eyes like, oh, help APS again with some old person. They just didn't understand. But once they did, it changed the mentality. And again, to this day, those things still happen. And rarely do we have any kind of incidents. Mario and I, as the APS and police supervisors, we stayed in contact all the time. Remember, it's like a marriage. Got to stay together, and you got to talk, and you have to share information as much as possible. And we ran a lot of things by each other. We didn't always agree. We had some arguments. I won, of course, but he taught me a lot. He taught me a lot about how to engage APS agents, which is something I didn't have, or that skill set. I was very much this is how we're doing it. That's it. I learned. He taught me, and vice versa. I taught him how to engage with cops because he didn't know how to do it. There was some level of fear. What do we bring to this? As cops, we have that ability, obviously, to hold the abuser accountable. We also have the ability to connect. We have an offline intranet for all intents and purposes. It's actually a global network, but most helpful here. We can send messages or do research on anybody anywhere in the United States like that. And if it's somebody that we're looking for, it might be a potential abuser, and they might connect to other cases, which we have had. We can connect all through and help as fast as possible, something that APS didn't have in the past. For example, we had a serial elderly rapist here in Montgomery County that we connected to other cases because of that partnership and the abilities that we had, which was wonderful. And our APS agents in that case actually really assisted us in getting the victims the right services, making sure they weren't re-victimized. And in some cases, we actually deployed the ombudsman as well, because in one case, they were in a home. So we had to get them to a new place. But again, this all comes down to that connection, those discussions, and having those offlines. I already discussed bringing another layer of safety to the APS agent. Our detectives would be willing to go out and drop the hat to help anybody. They would call us and say, hey, we got to go to this house. I know it's not yours. Would you come? It might be something. We would go. We do have that obviously investigative experience. And I'm not saying that to take anything away from APS. It's the criminal investigative stuff. You guys have all of that civil stuff. That's amazing. But when it comes to criminal court, we had to actually do some practice moot court because the rules are way different in criminal court than civil about what you can and can't do. And APS agents were a little confused by that. And we did the reverse with our cops for civil court to teach them, hey, this is what you can say here, but you can't say there. And here's why. That exposure really does create an understanding. I am absolute living proof of that understanding. I live by it every day, and I say it all the time. Exposing to each other everything that everybody has to one another is the best way to learn and keep it going all the time. I think once you get past the initial meeting and everyone's all happy and glad and everything else, then, hey, we're going down this road, we're in this E-MDT. How do we keep it going? Because all of us on this call, one day we're not going to be here. How are we going to get the people who fill our seats to keep this up in some manner and hopefully make it better, right? Because we want them to make it better. This is the worst part for anybody, is the memorandum of understanding or memorandum of agreement. It is the worst, most laborious process. Everyone's shaking their head. I say, and it's terrible, but it's one of those things you have to do. And realistically, and Lisa, if anybody needs it, I can grab it from Mario. I don't have it. I can send it out to the group. But ours is, I think, about 2-3 pages. And it basically says, here's what APS can do. Here's what the police can do. Here's what we can do together. Have a nice day. And that's it. And it's covered us many, many times. It talks about that law we have in the state of Maryland and a few other things, but it allows us to do a lot of stuff that we know when I leave or someone else leaves, the next person who picks up the mic will be able to follow that. The standard operating procedures for both entities are also a need. Things will change, computers will change, systems will change, all sorts of things. You'll need to have some sort of a playbook so people can take those things and change them as they need. I know COVID created the environment we're in now. I get it. These kind of things are very personal crimes. I'm a big proponent of the personal meeting. Now, I know and I understand that in some states, in some areas, you may only have 5 people, right? And you have 1,000 miles between you. Let's say Wyoming. Fully understand that. And having a regular Zoom meeting makes a whole lot of sense. I get that. But if you're in an area like mine where everyone's about 10 minutes away from each other, you should all be meeting at the same location or different locations. We met at our Family Justice Center. We sometimes met at our police headquarters, sometimes met at our Adult Protective Services Center. So everyone could see where everyone else worked to have a better understanding. Sharing that information, really important. I touched on it a little earlier, getting every report and every case assignment just to make sure. And we kept it in a secure silo within Office 365, and our detectives had access to it as well. So if maybe they said, hey, I'm Mrs. Smith, that name that comes to my head, they can go into the system, pull it up real fast, and it was outside of our report management system. APS dealt with that person 18 times. Okay, let's get them on board and figure out what's going on. Providing regular reports. So every day, I don't know what some of your positions are here. I didn't get the roster. I apologize. But for me, every day I get a report about what my division did the night before and the day before, and it's numbers and summaries and all sorts of stuff. And then I get about 480 emails an hour. Most of them I'm CC'd on that I don't care about, to be honest, but it makes somebody feel better. There are some that I do, but there's so much information coming at you in this position. And I'm the guy in this position as a captain that I have to report to the chief and say what's working and what's not. You need to develop a succinct one-pager that really says, hey, this is what we did last week. This is what we did last month. Here are the highlights, not in the minutia. Back to that return on investment. Hey, Detective Satinsky came to our E-MDT, and because of that, that meeting, we ended up picking up 2 more cases that he had that showed up in his system. And, it turns out we had one of them as well, didn't even know it. And now we're working together on this. And that resulted in an arrest, or it resulted in a case closure, even though the victim didn't want to proceed. But now we know everything that happened and the victim feels better. So those kind of things were very big to my chief at the time. And they still are. They still do that. So I absolutely suggest that. It shows it. But again, keep it to a one-pager. If you make it more than that, they're not going to read it. Make it a quick one-pager. And most chiefs, they love pictures. Go with pictures. More color, the better. You really have to investigate or create those investigative models that work for your agencies. So if you need to use the officer on scene and the agent on, let's say, like a FaceTime call when you're interviewing somebody, if that's the only way you can do it, do what you need to do, but just practice it. Have that idea so you can figure those things out as you move forward. There are going to be mistakes. Figure it out. There's going to be stuff that happens. We had this a couple times where we had an APS agent who tried to read someone their rights once. That was a whole nother story. So, but again, this is that helping and teaching, right? Explaining that. Go to conferences together. I have been very honored to have presented at 5 or 6 NAPSA conferences around the country over the last few years. And the people I've met there have been fantastic, except for Lisa. They've been absolutely fantastic. And it's been wonderful to listen to what other places are doing and stealing ideas. And I tell people that, like when I'm there, I told the folks from San Diego, I was like, oh, I'm plagiarizing that one. I'll give them credit for it, but I'm taking it. And we did the same. And I tell people when I do this all the time, take it, use it. I don't care. But going together really is a big thing. And it brings in that social aspect I talked about earlier. We can all sit around in our cubes on Zoom or at desks or on phones and talk. But the real connections happen when you have that social call, when you go to conferences and network, when you're not in the conference room, when you're out there and you're talking and people are learning about one another. That's when things change. And that's what happened to us for Montgomery County. Because at first, I'll be honest, things seemed very robotic and people were kind of standoffish. And then we had a social event and everything changed. And I'm not telling you how to do it. It's your call, but it's something that was important. And it was important to them, for the line agents and the line detectives to meet each other and talk to them. I showed up with Mario for about an hour and then we both left purposely. Most of them showed up the next day. That was good. The rest of them showed up the day after. But it's just very important to make sure they have that. And I think that not only the NAPSA conference, but there's a few others that they could go to around the country. And I'm sure, and I know there's grants out there that allow for a lot of these things. Make that happen. Turnover is a big deal with police. We get moved a lot. Literally, I could get a phone call when I got off this call with you all, and they could say, Captain Satinsky, you're going to X, and I'd have to pack up this office tomorrow and go there. We tried to make it something that the chief wouldn't touch where we are. And because of our contractual obligations, we were actually able to kind of go with that. And we kept people for a really long time. Because once they got into it, they didn't want to leave it. Where you get most of your turnover is at the executive level or the sergeant level. So once you get the right line officers or line detectives in there, they usually will stay. I'll tell you, the only people I lost in my line officers after we first redid the division, the section, was to promotion, which I'm happy for them, loss for us, but it's going to happen. It's important that as APS, you lean on the police supervisor or executive. Hey, who's getting this case? How are we going to train up this new person? Who is this new person? You might even want to ask, hey, can we sit on the hiring board for this? Some agencies will allow for that. So that's possible. And vice versa is true too. Hey, we're hiring new APS agents. Do you want to have one of your detectives sit on this to kind of see if they'll fit into our metric, or do they have questions? I know that seems foreign to a lot of people. It was foreign to me too, but it's possible. We did it. You can do it. You just got to know your parameters and your contractual obligations. We should be able to provide information as law enforcement supervisors. If you guys don't have laws or not sure, or they have memorandums of understanding or agreement are not in place, get those in place so everybody's on the same page. Because sometimes people will resort to, I think this is how it's supposed to be, and it's easier to say no. So that's why I say go back to the MOU. Have that MOU to really make sure everybody knows they can talk, because we can. We're all in the same lanes trying to help the same person. As I said earlier, officers are taught to do criminal investigations. We're taught to look for inconsistencies and consistencies in criminal matters and pull confessions out of suspects. That's the job, right? When I go in to do an interrogation, I'm looking for those lies and I'm looking to exploit those lies. My training on how to interact with a victim was about an hour in the police academy. And since then, probably 2 more hours, to be honest. We're just not taught that versus APS, which you guys are taught that all the time, which is awesome. So we leaned on that and used that, and it really helped teach our officers more. Civil matters are a whole nother area for us. Sheriff's offices do deal in civil matters quite a bit, mostly dealing with evictions and custody issues, not this area. Civil matters can sometimes bleed into criminal matters as far as what's admissible in court, and officers and detectives are very hesitant to testify in civil matters because sometimes civil matters, that information will get pulled into the criminal matter and could be misconstrued or utilized by a defense attorney to get someone off. So it's, again, back to that moot court, back to that practicing. What can we say? What can't we say? What can we do? What can't we do? How do we keep the cop in or out, or the APS agent in or out? It all comes down to what's in your notes, what your prosecutors say, what your civil attorneys say. And that's just sitting down and working out those processes. We didn't really have a whole lot of problems with the civil side of it because our criminal side was so much faster than the civil side. But that's not always the case, depending on the jurisdiction you're in. So again, you really need to sit down with your prosecutors and your civil folks to figure out what the best method is. There are civil offenses. You need to figure out what they are, and you need to let your police departments know, hey, these are the civil side of things. You need to know about these. Here's what can happen if you become part of the E-MDT. Here's what we'll be expecting. They just need to understand it. That's all. Not to say they won't do it. They just need to understand. Have the law enforcement agency, as well as you all, bring the policies you have pertaining to these investigations to the table. And everybody sit down, look right at them, figure out where are the inconsistencies. Because for the most part, minus HIPAA, potentially wraparound services, and maybe 1 or 2 other little things internally, most of them should line up, right? Respond to the scene, talk to the victim, figure out what needs to happen next. Who do you call? Those are all the basics. And when we looked at both of our policies, minus the fact that the APS one had a much better level of vocabulary than ours, they were fantastically aligned. They really were. They were very similar in a lot of ways. So we modeled our policies pretty much now. They're almost virtually the same between both agencies. Again, outside of the HIPAA stuff and some other things. You got to keep an open mind. Lacking an open mind from either side will kill this whole thing. But that goes with anything, right? Whether it's a SART program, whether it's a child abuse program, or this. If someone doesn't have an open mind, it's going to kill it. And if you identify that, if you see that within somebody on the E-MDT, it's incumbent upon you to not engage them negatively, but talk to your supervisor and have that supervisor talk to his or hers. Because sometimes, hey, maybe the cop had a bad day. Maybe the agent had a bad day. Whatever it may be, just try to smooth it out as best you can. Because the end result is always, how do we learn? How do we move forward? So, team members, who handles these cases? Okay, how many of you have an APS-led team? Like, does anyone have that, or are they just kind of co-located? I'll try if I can pull my chat over there. Oh, it won't work. All right, well, sorry, I was trying to pull the chat up, but it won't work while I'm doing this. Questions you have to ask for APS when you have an APS-led team is who handles these cases, like what team? So in Montgomery County, we have several different, our HHS is broken out into 5 silos, and APS is, there are 3 teams are separated out into that. Who's doing what? Do I have a night team, I have a day team, and I have a midnight team. How am I going to figure this out? When we get to these calls, who's leading? Is it going to be the police? Is it going to be APS? For safety concerns, we always went in first just to make sure that the place was safe, because we weren't going to put APS in a bind or have their agents in a position where they might get hurt. And once the scene was secure, we bring the APS agent in, and we'd never say they were a detective. We would just say, hey, this is APS agent Fur, and she works with us. You'll please talk to her. And that was it. We never said anything else. We didn't tell the truth that she was an APS agent. We just said agent. and the people started talking, we would stand there and listen and follow up. What do you need from us, meaning the police? What does APS need from us? All of you have different agencies and different needs. You should have outlined already what you need or what you wish you had from the police departments that you work with. Besides personnel, how would you like to attack these cases? What information do you need to further your cases? What information can you provide the police department to further their cases? Those things should be all listed out. And then, how can we help? Really? How do we help? And in the end, when these two entities get together, you got to wait about 6 months, because that's what it took for us. Then all of a sudden the prosecutor gets on board because things start flowing up to them. And they say, oh, wow, we've seen a whole lot of these cases out of nowhere. And in our case, our state's attorney, he's also, I don't think he's hit 60 yet, but he's getting there. We reminded him that this was important because of his age as well. And he ended up creating a whole new unit just because of it. So, and it's still going today. And we have a program manager that clears out all these cases and divvies them out to the two specialized prosecutors. Community partners are sometimes a little difficult if you don't already have established MOUs and partnerships, especially if there's been years of no contact between non-governmental agencies and a government agency. Not to say it can happen, it can, it just takes a while. As hard as it is to trigger a relationship between APS and police, it's 100 times harder to trigger that dormant relationship between government and non-government agencies. But I will tell you, there are a lot of places that we created relationships with, even if they're handshake agreements or kind of like the, hey, we're just handling this agreements, that really helped us out. We had an agency here in our county that would help place victims that we couldn't place because of, we didn't have a place for them. We had nowhere, they were abuse victims, they were elderly, we had nowhere to put them. This facility said, hey, if you ever have this problem, you call us anytime, we'll just take care of it until you find a place. But don't tell them. I was like, okay. And we did it. And it worked out. We used them about 8 times. They were fantastic. And we never talked about who they were, never said anything. They just did it. And thankfully, they never billed me because I can't even imagine how much that would have cost. But they were wonderful that we had that. And that was from a meeting, a random meeting at a conference that Mario had. And it all kind of went from there. They really are a great addition. They bring you have separate entities like what I just discussed, as well as victim advocacy out in the community. And if you're in an area like myself, where I have Montgomery County, DC, and Virginia pretty much all touching each other, there's a lot of crossover. People run between all three all the time. Those community partners actually help a lot of times bridge those gaps. It was easier to get along with APS to start up with than it was to find someone at DC Police to help me with anything. So just to give you an idea, that community partnership actually helped me out because we had a woman in our county who had worked in both places. And she's like, oh, I know X, I'll make a call. And that was it. So those community partners really are helpful. Plus, they can also really help engage victims, right? You can't find them or victims' families. They're good about having that network of finding those people. We have untold number of entry points into law enforcement about how you could report these days. It could be text, it could be call, it could be web, it could be email, it could be through a confidential source, all these things. APS in Montgomery County has virtually the same. So how do we take all these entrance points and combine them into one? That took a little while to map all of the electronics to the same place. And that was more of a technological wonder that somebody finally did. And it was all within our own county, so it was easy to handle. But my suggestion is if you have, especially your larger areas where you have probably fractured computer systems, have those, everyone who's responsible for those get together to make sure all the information feeds to one place. And I get that maybe one side of the state doesn't always care about what happens on the other side of the state, especially if there's 1,000 miles apart. But you know what? There might come a time when they do. And by everybody having everything in the same place, everybody can see what everybody's doing and everybody can work together and they're all in the same place. That shared system I talked about earlier is just a simple Office 365 team that is now been up and running for 11 years and has thousands and thousands upon police reports and APS intakes that are in there. No final reports are in there. It's all the beginnings. And the idea is just who they got assigned to so people can look back. Because our RMS system, report management system, and the state's report management system are totally separate. This was the only way we could find that we could work it out, where we could share all the information, not have to call Maureen, hey, can you ask Catherine to look this up for me, please? Because, you know, how many times a day would you get that, right? Investigator calling or the APS agent. Now they can just do it on their own and then figure it out. We saw huge time savings by doing that and not waiting for return phone calls, return emails. Here are some of the resources that are out there. I'm sure most of you know all about these things. The Eagle Project was a fantastic project. It was initially started just for patrol officers responding to elder abuse, kind of like 5-minute vignettes on, hey, you should do X or Y, and more or less a decision. I called it the elder abuse decision-making tree, or a choose your own adventure. And it really helped out. I've actually pushed it out to our cops a few times. We have a bunch of them that use it quite a bit. And I know our detectives do as well. Obviously, the DOJ's elder abuse initiative, all sorts of stuff on there. And here's some information on how to select your E-MDT members. I believe, I don't think that one's not going to work here. Maybe it will. Let me see. Oh, it went to the screen. So here are some ideas on how to select your team members getting started. And a lot of this goes over, it's going to be in the PowerPoint if you have it. If you haven't got it, Lisa, I'm happy to send it out. Just ideas on who to select, how to select them. For us, we had prosecutors, we had police, we had APS, ombudsman, the same nurse from our main county hospital. We actually also had child welfare services in there for a time, depending on the case, because sometimes it was great grandma taking care of great grandkids, and that kind of connected all these other little dots. We had district investigators, occasionally was a federal investigator, and partner agencies. And we allow anyone in our jurisdiction or outside, if they have some manner or something going on in Montgomery County, to come talk to us and come and get information. We also give trainings at these places as much as we can, and we train together as much as possible. I have no idea who any of those people are. That was a standard photo somebody threw in there, but they all look very happy. I'm happy to take any questions anyone has.
Jordan, Krista from New Hampshire put in, if you could address how you're able to get the APS administration on board with the safety training.
We bribed them.
Well, you said
No,
you
seriously?
It was an APS person injured, correct?
So actually, that's funny you said it. That was when this all first came up. Mario, my partner, I think he's a 3rd degree brown belt in something. And he was basically like, oh yeah, well, I love this idea, Jordan, let's do it. Then he comes back to me about a week later with the exact thing. Well, what about liability? From the police side, we're made to get beat up. None of us care. So it didn't even cross my mind. So we ended up going through our legal department, and our legal department said 2 things. One, APS agents routinely go out to these places by themselves. So they do need to have something. And the second part was, if you don't train them, you're held liable. How quickly did that change their minds? So they were in training like that. And we still do this training yearly, sometimes twice a year, depending on what it is. And we hold it at our police academy, which is great to watch the recruits go by as a bunch of APS agents walk in and everyone's looking at each other like, what is going on? But no, that's how we overcame that. Great question. Anything else? Let's pull up the chat here.
So we've got a few minutes. If anybody wants to unmute and ask Jordan a question.
Yeah, please.
He's here for that, and or if you want to ask it of your colleagues here. Carol, we got a good California showing. So, Catherine, go ahead.
Good.
Hi there. Thank you so much for this presentation. It was definitely enlightening, especially since I am currently creating an elder abuse resource guide for LA County. And LA County has like 10 million people and things like that.
Right.
So I work very closely with the Alzheimer's Association, and they are doing trainings for LAPD and sheriffs. And I am including my resource guide in their trainings, and it was already uploaded. So it's going to start being used, which I'm really excited about. But the different resources that you were talking about are exactly what we have in our guide. So it's just reiterating what we need. But I thought it was really interesting when you were saying that people like colors and pictures, because I had a few people, I had a lot of people overview my resource guide, including police officers, and they were telling me no pictures, no colors, plain language. They're like, keep it as plain as possible. We want QR codes. We want landing links. We don't want colors. So that's why I'm just thinking about all of this, because what is the best approach for it? Because like I said, I made it very plain language.
So no, and I think that's, Catherine, I think that's fantastic. I think, so we did some years ago, I was working on another project for another DOJ thing, and we did something that was very plain language that had those links, and we found that people didn't click on them. They had them, but they didn't click on them.
Yeah.
And when we had stuff that had pictures or, examples, and when I'm talking about pictures, I'm saying, comparing A to B. Here we are, 2013, we did X, 2014, we did Y. If you don't do this, this will happen. We found that people took it in more. I'm not like, that's a fascinating way to look at it. And I'm all for it. But yeah, I just found that they didn't use it because we were able to track that to see if they used the links, and they just never used them. And I don't know why.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. You're not going to be able to see this, but I'm going to grab this really quickly.
Now I can't see you. You just left. There you are.
Okay, so we have this
Okay.
really tiny resource guide. So along with what I do, there's something that my hospital has that's called the Center for Assault Treatment Services, right?
Okay.
So they help domestic violence, human trafficking patients. So they created this really tiny resource guide.
Right.
And this is what they were saying. This is what police officers want. They want something they could have in their pocket. And I'm looking at this right now, very plain language. You know what I mean? There's like a couple red things, but is this a better idea of having something to put in your pocket?
Let me address that. So when I was first a cop, that's exactly what we had. And that's why I was picking up my pocket here. I'm like, literally, I had cards, domestic violence, child abuse, homicide, robbery. It was like, literally was like an Uno card coming out of my pocket. But now, and I don't know about LA County, but for us, we've issued cell phones to every single officer. So if and you got to remember our police force, and I don't know what age, and I don't know if you want to talk about it here, but if you're talking to the actual patrol officers, I would bet you that's not what they want. You're probably talking to somebody of my age or my rank.
That's a really good point too.
So, I mean, if I talk to my line officers, they're going to go put it on an app. I want to go like this and get it. All right. I don't want to pull anything out of my pocket. I have one guy who barely knows how to write because he's been typing all his life. So it's something to think about. And I struggle with this because like you said the card, I'm like, I know that. That's fantastic. But generationally, that card means nothing.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. That's why I've been like, that's why I really appreciate this, because I've been trying to go back and forth and I'm like, what is the best way, not correct way, but the best way to do this? And I know that like other people are like, how are you creating this guide? And I'm like, trial and error.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
I feel like I've had so many run-throughs of it, like just trying to see which links would actually be the best ones. But when you were talking about Eagle, that's like the main one. And I mean, when I went to the Elder Justice Summit, they had me put it on my phone right away. It was great when they're like, pull out your phone, put it on. So I have it on my phone. And that's kind of like what I'm hoping will happen with my resource guide too.
So the Eagle process, they actually asked me to review it years ago before they put it out. And it I love this one. And no offense to any academics on the line, please don't take it. Lisa knows where I'm going here. One of the things that sometimes get produced are 900-page documents with all sorts of wonderful ideas. But the only person who ever read it is the other academic. The comp has never read it. Not happening. When the Eagle project first came out, I was going through it, and actually a couple of us, I think one of my old partners actually did the same. And we all said the same thing. There's too much. There's too much. Be quick, be succinct, tell us where to go, be plain language. And they converted it, they brought it down. Now, all that academic stuff was still in the background in some other aspect, as far as an evidentiary based, a footnote, something else, but it wasn't the main part of it. It wasn't the book. So I'd be interested to know what putting it in practice, Catherine. If they read this out to the rank and file, what's the rank and file going to say? Hey, thanks for this. I can barely read this, and not your fault, just what you were told. Or, hey, I wish it was on here so I could use it.
Yeah. So, Serena, do you have a quick question?
I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. That's fine. You just unmuted. I want to make sure. I just put in the chat a SurveyMonkey link so that you can do an evaluation of this webinar. Very important, so that we get your feedback as we move forward with doing those improving what we do for grantees and their communities. So please take a moment, fill that out. Anyone else have a question for Jordan as we finish up? We've got time for one more question.
You guys, if not, I do want to say thank you very much for having me. I'll tell you, Grace and Lisa's group here is fantastic. I've been honored to be on it for a few years now, as far as helping out on the advisory board, and some of the stuff that's come up, I can't even imagine would have ever been discussed 25 years ago. And you know, you guys are helping people you don't even know you're helping sometimes. And they may hate all of us at some point, even our victims, because they don't understand us. But in the end, you really are doing some good work, and I hope you take some today. And if you find something useful, great. And if you find something to make it better, please let me know, because I'm all about stealing your ideas. I'll give you credit, but I'm still going to steal it. So thank you all very, very much.
Thank you, Jordan. We really appreciate your participation and your heart in this work. So I'm subbing for Marty Washington from InCall. So when we'll send out the slides when she gets back from the conference that she's at, and reach out to the TA folks if you've got any questions, or for the community members, reach out to your partner on the MDT group, and we'll do what we can for you. Thanks again, everybody, for your time today. And thanks again, Jordan, for sharing your expertise.
Thank you. Thanks,
y'all.
Jordan.
Thank you,
everyone.
Jordan.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
All righty, we're good to go. Fabulous job, man. You
Thanks.
Thanks,
you
Troy.
clicked through those
Was I going too fast?
perfectly.
Did I go too fast, or?
No,
Okay.
it was, I'm always trying to because as a trainer, I want to know, how far ahead or behind I am. You were
Yeah.
spot on. I'm
Well, thank you. A good group. I mean, so who's Carolyn Sewell? I know that name for some reason. Who is that?
she works with Lisa Nuremberg in
Oh, hold on. You're
California.
still recording. I just looked up.
Good.